clerk will read out the names.
It's a delight to have you join us here on ITV for Parliament and Governors who are in Benin City, Nigeria. I am Uyi Agmofwegwe. On the program this week, we want to look at a number of developments, especially in light of COVID-19, even though we understand that some of these developments actually predates the outbreak of the pandemic. Two issues quickly. First is request by the executive, that is by the federal government, to have loans, one $5.5 billion and then another $22 billion to be approved so that the government, the federal government that is, can take care of certain very pressing issues. And then again, looking at the fact that the country, economically speaking, is constrained, no thanks to the fact that the price of oil on the international market had dropped significantly, again occasioned by the outbreak of the pandemic. That has raised questions really as to what happens if we didn't have the crude. For example, some persons have talked about the post-oil economy, and then you also have those who argue that it's not possible to have that right now because Nigeria as a government does not seem to be working hard enough along those lines. But let's help make sense of this discussion on the program this wonderful Wednesday evening. We're back shortly. Thank you for staying with us. My guest is Destiny Owobo, is a statistician, I should say, and an economist. He's going to help us bring in all of the salient elements so we can make sense of this development. It's always a pleasure to have you on the program, Destiny.
Thank you for having me.
I want us to look at the fact that first, it's as if it's a culture to borrow, even though we've talked about this many times, and you say it's not so much about the fact that you're borrowing, it is more about what you're borrowing for.
Of course.
Two issues. One, $5.5 billion, $22 billion in dollars, approved for the President Muhammadu Buhari-led federal government.
Yes.
Is that a step in the right direction?
It depends. It depends on what. In cases like this, we look at the culture and the habits. A great American statesman once said, habits can trump reason many times.
Right.
Okay, so it has become a habit for the Nigerian government to follow the borrowing window to solve its problems. And so even any time such a proposal comes up or such approvals come up, we normally look at the antecedents. It is becoming a pattern of borrowing and seeking more debt. I'll give you some perspective. In 2003, Nigeria was forgiven a debt of $36 billion. These debts were accumulated between 1978 and 2003. That's 25 years. Now, in 25 years, our total debt was $36 billion, and then we started shouting we had debt overhang. But in the last 4 years alone, the total debt accumulated by this government is approaching over $40 billion. Okay, so we are going to do some.
Should we be scared?
We should. We should. Now, in 25 years, we accumulated $36 billion. In 5 years, we accumulated over $40 billion. Only this year alone, about $22.7 billion in 1 year. I mean, between January and now. So, if somebody begins to ask questions, is it sustainable? As we speak right now, over 50% of our budget, over 25% of our budget is used to fund service the debts already incurred. So we are adding to that that lump. So the problem is it sustainable? Who pays? The future, obviously. And so is that the only way to solve the debt problem? Are there other creative ways we should have looked at? Is it, like I said, are we looking at the easiest approach to solving this problem? We look within the economy itself, within the budget itself, whether we can look at other creative means of not borrowing and solving the problem with the resources we already have. These are the issues. So whether it is a step in the right direction or not is a function of what has happened to what we have done in the last 25 years with our debt, and what economists and people who are interested in the issues think based on the, because according to economists, the best predictor of the future is the past.
Right. There is something I should ask you at this point. Naturally, it is the executive that makes a request to the National Assembly, especially where it has to do with instruments such as this one we're talking about right now. Okay, the National Assembly, combination of both chambers, has professionals across fields, lawyers, bankers, at least people who were trained as bankers, economists, public finance experts, and so on and so forth. In fact, we understand that the Senate, for example, in particular, has a Public Accounts Committee. It's a standing committee of the Senate. Incidentally, the chairman of that committee, as it stands today, is our own senator from Edo South Central District here, Senator Matthew Regide. The point being made with all this is, what are the core factors, the fundamental issues that these committees, relevant committees regarding public finance, for example, issues about budget, would have to look at to say, okay, this is salient enough, this is pressing enough, let's approve?
Okay, first of all, is a look at the exigency. Why the need for borrowing? Why are we borrowing? 2, repayment capabilities. 3, due process.
Right.
Okay, they are, according to the Public Finance Act of 2007, there are procedures which must be followed.
So that act ought to guide the procedure?
Yes, there are procedures which must be followed to borrow or to do anything when it has to involve spending government money. But so this committee, their job is basically advisory, or what we call more of oversight. Okay, oversight, to ensure that the process is followed. Okay, now we have so many checks in the system to ensure that everything is followed. 1, we have the Attorney General of the Federation, the Auditor General of the Federation that audits these accounts. We have the Accountant General of the Federation. We have the Act itself. We have the Public Actions Committee, which you talked about just now, and all those kind of things.
That's the Public Accounts Committee, right?
So we have those agencies and bodies are there to ensure that everything is done according to basic principles. And when we are talking about borrowing, we even have a special office in the central bank called the Debt Management Office.
Right, the DMO.
Yes, that brings stipulations on what we need to borrow for and whether processes have been followed, and puts a limit on what states or federal government can borrow, giving a small margin. So these are the issues we look at, first of all. But then there's a problem of this independence, of this separation of powers.
Right.
A lot of people are beginning to think that the current Senate is a rubber stamp Senate. Okay, that's what a lot of people are thinking. Recently, the federal government approved 27 billion for a renovation of the complex.
Right.
At the same time, while the federal government was reducing education spending and health spending, it was spending 27 billion for renovation. I mean, for something that is not an emergency. The complex is not a disaster zone. It's not a pressing issue. So if you could take over 80 billion from health and education,
which are very critical,
especially at this COVID-19 period, and then you gave National Assembly 27 billion to renovate the structures, people begin to ask where the priorities lie. And people have also imagined that it is because it was related to the National Assembly that the government approved it easily. Now, if government approves things like that easily, it makes them friends, buddies. Okay. And so people are beginning to say that if the executive brings any bill, if you check in the last 2-3 months, any bill that is submitted quickly, they don't even look at it.
So the point you're making is there are people who think this is a case or a situation of quid pro quo.
Simply put. So the critical processes have been compromised by, that's what some people think, given the fact that a lot of bodies protested those expenditures. So there are also checks. There's the civil society organizations. There are so many people who protested. Human rights groups, economic rights groups, who protested against the 27 billion, for instance, approved for them. They were not listened to. Even as we speak right now, there are a lot of people who think that some things are wrong with the current budget or current approvals about the loan. The loan was highly contested and protested against by experts, by civil society organizations, a lot of people. But the National Assembly, in fact, they are even helping the executive to justify why we need to borrow more. You know, they are now sounding like the spokesman of the executive.
At least as far as this issue is concerned.
Yes, because if you read the papers, you see the head of the Senate saying that...
But as Senate President?
Yes, the Senate President, saying that we have no options, we don't have resources, we have to diversify. It's sounding more like an executive. Instead of looking at why do we need to borrow? What has happened to what?
How do we cut back?
How do we cut back? What other things? Okay, there are so many things. A lot of people have said that the size of government is too large in this country. The cost of running the government is too... Nobody talks about cutting the budget on their paycheck. Nobody talks about reducing the cost of governance, which is a heavy burden on the budget. But we can cut health, we can cut education, and increase renovation costs. I mean, it shows a misplacement of priorities. So those are the issues. So even if we have those bodies that are working together to ensure that the budget process is clean and neat, human beings man those bodies, and these human beings have interest. And if these human beings do not believe they are performing these police rules, that they are bodies, then collusion can take place, and such collusions can encourage the draining of the national purse and pushing the debt to the future.
You have made a number of references to the Public Finance Act of 2007.
Yes.
That's been a while. A lot has changed, financially and otherwise.
Yes.
Life is becoming ever more dynamic right
Yes.
now. One would have thought by now a second look should have been taken at that act of 2007, which is well over a decade behind us.
Yes.
So say let's update, given the realities in front of us now. I'm not sure that has been done, of course. I'm not sure that is even in the works as it stands right now. How do we overhaul our public finance processes? Of course, in the final analysis, it's going to come back to the the legislators themselves. Can we make sense going forward?
Yes, we can, but not from the individual perspective. Like I said, the laws, the bodies are there to ensure if everybody does his job.
Right. With
the current laws and everything goes on well. Like I told you, but the problem we've always had is our institutions are very weak. Okay? The office of the Auditor General alone can crack serious financial malpractices. Only that office, if it was doing its job.
But that's not the case, obviously.
But in the last 30 years, we've not had any negative report about our budget process or our spending processes. What does that tell you? You mean it has been perfect for 30 years? The Accountant General's office, the Minister of Finance office, the legislature. I mean, there have not been any time.
Office of Budget and National Planning.
There are so many offices that ensures that these things work. They work according to design. But everybody seems to be on holiday, and it's like they just pass it from table to table and then they approve. So, like I said, these institutions need to understand their core mandate. I think there's this. It was designed around checks and balances. These bodies are supposed to be independent in finance, have serious autonomy in their own rights. But what happens is these offices, most of them, the appointments are made by the presidency, and then it's political.
Yeah.
Politics trumps economics and common sense in this country. So what happens is these people they know their jobs, they are supposed to have done that, but for politics' sake, sometimes they don't want to do that. They don't want to be the bad person in the... it's like passing the ball, looking for who to blame in the first place. And if there's nobody to blame, then let everything go on.
Right.
So what we need to do is to strengthen the institutions. And the government, by its body language, the organ of government that has the power to start that process is the executive. When the executive is very serious with strengthening the process, the other institutions, follow suit because they have the power to do that, while the other institutions simply watch what the executive is doing. But in Nigeria, it appears the executive, by words, tends to have a great vision for the country. But by the body language, we sometimes see that it's strongman politics. You forgot to ask something. Recently, a body was set up, the Salami body. What happened? What happened? They were supposed to be advising the government.
Yes.
On economic matters.
Yes. The advisory council.
The advisory council. So, what is their role in all this? Did you hear any statement like who is advising who? They've
been given their terms of reference, they've been given their mandate. So is the ball not in their court, apparently?
Yeah, it's not in their court, but of course we expect that they must have looked at the rising.
So they should be making significant input at this point. At
this point, yes, because if you are going to borrow 25 billion plus another 5.5 billion, that's $30 billion. That should raise a serious conversation. The total budget itself, the budget of Nigeria is 40 billion.
In dollars.
In dollars, $40 billion. And then you are borrowing in the same fiscal year, $30 billion. When you borrow 70% of your budget, it's what a national discussion. We should be seeing actors putting the figures down. But it appears it's just paddy. The executive submits the proposal, the legislature reads.
Quite frankly, I want us to talk about the budgetary process in totality. But we want to take a quick break now, and then we're going to fragment that last part of the conversation for you shortly. Stay with us. Let's talk about the 2020 budgets. You look at our budget, it has been staggered. Some persons have said, look, even though we know a review has been done by the National Assembly, it has not been significant enough.
Yes.
All right. And then you have those who are particularly concerned, just like you made reference to a while ago, about the fact that a downward review was done regarding health.
Yes.
And education. This is 2020. I mean, at the turn of the 21st century, there's so much of investment by countries that are forward-looking, countries that are forward-thinking, countries that are proactive, making substantial investments in areas like health and education.
Yes.
For common sense reasons. People have to be alive to go to school. People have to go to school to build capacity.
Yes.
And be able to impact society for good.
Of course.
That changes the conversation about priorities, doesn't it?
Yes, that's the ideal. Somebody said, you show what you care about by where your money goes to.
Right.
So there's no better way to say it. The government does not value education and health. But because if they do, why would you be reducing the budget? We don't even spend up to 4% of our budget on education and health. And then the universal standard is 26%
for education, UNESCO.
For education. We have not even gotten up to 5-10%. So we're even reducing it. And then the reason they give is we don't have enough resources to fund the budget. But by the same reason, we do not complain we don't have enough resources to fund the government.
Or election.
Or election, for instance. We always have resources for that. There's always resources for that. But we don't have resources to fund critical sectors like education and health. So if I wanted to make a statement, it shows the government is not serious about education and health.
Let's talk about bodies like IMF, for instance.
Yes.
IMF released a forecast sometime early May to say on account of COVID-19 pandemic, African countries will take a hit. We already see that playing out, of course. In fact, they are talking about how that African economies will shrink by at least 3.4%.
Of course.
Nigeria is said to be the largest economy in Africa, even though South Africa is said to be the most industrialized on the continent. All of this will play out. But then again, conversely, it will appear the price of oil is looking good at the international market.
Yes.
Are we blessed already, or are we being blessed?
It's good news. That's our major commodity. If a little jump in revenue will be plus.
Right.
So if it's going up, well, just this afternoon, the federal government, the Senate approved another 300 billion to fund the budget. Another 300 billion to make it 10.8 trillion. So that's because of the forecast. The revenue has gone up, so quite naturally. Like I said before, we actually need more money to fund the budget. We need to run the country. And so any little off in the international market, in the price of oil, is a plus for Nigeria. Okay, but then, like I said, that's just a short-term solution to the problem. We need long-term measures like developing other sectors of the economy. And I'm glad that the federal government signed a contract with Siemens in terms of power. There's a major plan going on. On the ground. I'm still researching it. I'm looking at the possibilities of Siemens doing like a 5-year contract in this country, ensuring our power gets off the ground. The idea is to raise the economy, the ability, our generating capacity to over 20,000 megawatts. And then it's not funded through our normal budget system or our normal public sector system because it is riddled with corruption. The government brought an innovative way to solve that problem by partnering with national bodies to pay Siemens directly. Okay. Pay Siemens directly without passing through our public...
no middlemen.
No middlemen. So you pay Siemens directly, and then they run the power. They are going to deliver their service in about 5 years. And so there are stages, timelines. And so that's a long-term project, and that's laudable. If it works the way it is planned. And so if that is going by the back office, we expect that in the next 5 years, we should have delivered some major milestones in power. Because like I said, if we don't get power right, the other diversification we're talking about is just a mirage. It's not going to happen. So if government is trying to develop our gas infrastructure, our railway networks, and our power infrastructure, that's a plus in the long run. But in the short run, any small bump in oil price is okay. All we just try to do is to try to reduce corruption, to find a way to reduce the leakages. Nigeria is in a situation where what we are looking now is how do we, let me give you a scenario. We have many people in the house, and then we need firewood. So a lot of people are making firewood to try to make food. And then some people, while you are putting more firewood, some other people are going to take pieces of the firewood out. That's what's happening. Now, while most people are using gas cookers and other cookers, we are using firewood. So we are still in that business.
So it slows the process.
It slows the process. So when you are still trying to put fire in the firewood, and a lot of people, their business is taking sticks from the firewood.
It will appear those who are even taking out the sticks, they are more.
They are more
than those who are putting firewood.
They may not be more, but they are more powerful. They are closer to the fire. I mean, we are talking about the politicians here. So they are the people that have they are close to the fire.
Right.
So most of us are spectators in this whole game. So if there are leakages in the system, then we will have to borrow more. We are just simply postponing the evil day. But the idea now is to manage the resources we have within what we have, and try to reduce these leakages by strengthening our institutions. Because like I said, development is a function of two things. One, capacity, and two, institutional checks and balances. Now, if our institutions are strong, and then the next problem will be, where do we get resources from? And using our institutions to check these leakages. But if our institutions are porous, even if you give Nigeria $1 trillion, the porosity of the institutions will allow corruption to fizzle it away and take it to developed countries. And one thing about resources, the countries that do not know how to manage resources eventually become beggars to those that know how to manage their resources.
And that's not a good position.
And that's not a good position.
Last question, just before we're done. The House of Representatives has invited members of the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19. Of course, we understand that task force, the PTF as we call it,
yes,
is headed by Boss Mustafa, who doubles as the Secretary to the Government of the Federation.
Okay.
Now, the members of the House of Representatives believe, for reasons best known to them, that the PTF is foot dragging to come give accounts
yes,
of the money, funds that have been made available to them. We need to have this discussion because we're talking about public finance in Nigeria right now.
Yes.
When you have a situation like this, that creates doubts already about public finance, and then going forward, it gives the impression that there's little or no transparency, doesn't it?
Of course. The same problem. Like in May 28, the ICPC announced that they were going to investigate the task force itself and the COVID-19 funds.
Yeah, that no money should be stolen.
Yes. I mean, the Accountant General of the Federation gave a scheme on how it should be spent. The funds should be spent in the first place. So if there's obviously cases, there were reports of corruption. Not just, we are not just saying, a lot of people made claims that these monies were fizzled away. A lot of people paid money to their private accounts from the emergency funds. Okay, and then according to reports available to me, billions of naira were, just Nigerians alone donated 29 billion to the government,
including corporate citizens.
29 billion. Okay, the federal government donated over 30 billion to states. Okay, National Assembly alone donated millions and millions and millions. So there are so many billions we are talking about here. The total billions, by my estimate, is roughly 600 billion to fight.
Well over half a trillion, you mean?
Half a trillion. You know, that's a lot of money. Common sense is that we should account for it. But then these monies were fizzled out through many people, agents and things like that. So there is no standard of finding out how these monies were spent. Like I told you, most of Nigeria is an informal economy. And so most of these monies were given to people by cash. So where was the register? So by the time you begin to trace where these monies were spent to, you are going to have problems with data, number one. Two, you are going to have problems with identification. Most of them are going to tell you they pay these monies to so. And then the problem is most of these monies were not paid through the banking system.
So verifying how the money was spent becomes even too rigorous that you probably don't want to get it to a logical conclusion.
Yes, the cost of finding out what happened to the money may eventually outdo
the value you are going to get.
The value you are going to get from that. But then it is worth investigating. Right. It's worth investigating. It's a step in the right direction. They should be asked questions. They should come. You know why? Sometimes when just by merely talking, they may give us clues into where we should look at. Because by not investigating this, when problems like this come in the future, then it will be free for all again.
And it's also a wrong precedent, I guess.
Yes, a wrong precedent. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Destiny Owabu,
Thank you.
economist and statistician, for coming on Parliament and Governance this wonderful Wednesday. This is a fine place to leave the discussion, but then again, it's ongoing. We will continue to follow, and coverage here on ITV continues. I'm Uyag Mofwegwe. Enjoy the rest of your evening.